Tonight's topic, helping families understand ADHD. Why are we talking about this? The parents and I were sitting around thinking about topics, and one of the questions that came up was, well, how do you explain ADHD to a child, or how do you explain ADHD to another family member? So we thought it would be a good idea to have a presentation tonight that focused on that particular issue. Okay. It's just good to keep in mind that this is a disorder of self-regulation. Individuals with ADHD have a lot of difficulty regulating their behavior, but also their emotional functioning and other aspects of executive functioning, as we call it. And it's manifested primarily in terms of the three symptoms you see above: inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity. Again, because this is not an overview discussion, I'm not going to go into the details of all that. I'm going to assume that you have some familiarity with that. Certainly, if you have questions about that later, I'd be happy to answer them. But in the meantime, I'd like you to keep in mind that a good way to think about this in your head is it's a disorder of self-regulation. All right? And that's very important. One of the things that frequently comes up for parents of kids with ADHD is who's to blame. And usually moms and dads, but especially moms, get the blame for a child with ADHD behaving the way that they do. And for that reason, I think it's really important for you to understand what the causes are. Now, we don't know with 100% certainty what causes ADHD, but with about probably 80 to 90% certainty, we have a good idea of some of the things that may contribute to the causes of ADHD. And most of those are neurobiological factors, which I'll talk about in a moment. But here's another really important concept that gets a lot of mileage for you in your, not only your own understanding of ADHD, but helping others understand it as well. So why do kids or adults have problems paying attention, sitting still, thinking before they act, managing time, and so on and so forth? It's been speculated that the core deficit of ADHD, self-regulation, goes back to a deficit in that part of the brain that governs regulation. In particular, governs the process of inhibition, stopping, putting on the brakes. So we think that this particular part of the brain, which allows you to put on the brakes, is what allows you to pause and think before you act. It allows you to stop when you're in the middle of something, and also allows you to block out things that are going on in order to focus on something else. That's what that part of the brain does under normal conditions, but in many individuals with ADHD, that part of the brain is not functioning as optimally as we'd like because it's underactive or under-aroused. Okay? So an underactive or under-aroused behavioral inhibition center in the brain is what makes it difficult for people to stop before they act, stop in the middle of something, or block out interference. Another thing that is important to keep in mind is that when you can't stop and block things out and focus, it makes it difficult for you to retrieve memories from the past, and it also makes it difficult for you to put the present on hold in order to think into the future, which allows you to plan ahead and organize and anticipate. So this particular part of the brain that governs stopping, inhibiting, delaying, isn't working as well as it ought to be. And there are many theories as to why that is happening. The most prominent of these theories is that the brain needs certain chemicals to function normally. One of those chemicals is dopamine. And it's been speculated that in brains of individuals with ADHD, dopamine is in short supply. Consequently, that part of the brain that needs dopamine isn't able to function. It's not aroused. It's not active enough in order to put on the brakes. There are other chemicals in the brain that have been implicated, but we don't need to go into that right now. It's also been suggested that that part of the brain that's underactive doesn't get enough blood flow. Blood flow is not as plentiful as it ought to be to feed that part of the brain. Or there's not enough energy via glucose metabolism to activate that part of the brain. Now, everything that I just said helps you understand how the brain is disrupted, leading to ADHD. But what I didn't tell you is how is that caused in the first place. And one of the things that, well, actually, before I do that, let me, if this works, let me show you the brain chemistry issue with a very brief video.
Doctors believe that the brain of a child with ADHD doesn't have enough of the brain chemicals dopamine and, to a lesser degree, norepinephrine. These chemicals facilitate communication within the part of the brain that controls attention and behavior. Reuptake of these neurotransmitters is believed to be modulated by the dopamine transporter. Current research suggests that in patients with ADHD, an insufficient interaction of these transmitters with the receptors exists, causing the symptoms of ADHD. Methylphenidate and similar medications block the dopamine transporter, thereby minimizing reuptake and increasing the availability of these neurotransmitters to help in the management of the symptoms of ADHD.
So let me just summarize the main points once again. The brain has neurons that fire from one to another, and when one neuron fires to the other, it releases chemicals like dopamine. But the dopamine is supposed to go to the next neuron, and then the signal gets continued. What happens from this video is dopamine is released from the first neuron. It goes into that gap between the two neurons, but instead of going to the next neuron, it goes back up to the first one. And because that happens, that part of the brain that governs inhibition isn't functioning properly. But this particular video I showed you is critical to explaining to people why stimulant medications are used. Because what stimulant medications do is, after the dopamine is released from the first neuron, stimulant medications block the receptors on the first neuron so that the dopamine can't come back up. It's got to go to the next neuron. That's how stimulants work, by making sure that enough dopamine is available for the next neuron in that part of the brain that governs behavioral inhibition. Okay? Now, this is just a quick summary of the things that could cause dopamine to be in short supply and so forth. There is no one pathway by which ADHD occurs. Multiple pathways have been implicated. But the most common pathway by which the brain, this part of the brain here, where the inhibition center is located, the main pathway by which that is disrupted is through genetics. ADHD runs in families. We know that if a child has ADHD, there's a 15 to 20% chance his biological mom has ADHD, 25 to 30% chance his biological father does. A biological sibling, has about a 25% chance. If it's a fraternal twin, it goes up to 40%. If it's an identical twin, it goes up to about 70 or 80%. And we now have molecular genetic findings that support a genetic hypothesis. So a great deal of the reason why someone has ADHD can be explained in most cases through the gene pool. Now, moms who smoke excessively or drink excessively during pregnancy increase the risk for a lot of disruptions to the fetus, and one of those disruptions can be higher risk for ADHD in offspring. And then there are various other things that can contribute to altering brain chemistry, brain functioning to lead to ADHD. But what you'll notice here, these are all biological mechanisms. These are not psychological mechanisms. I don't have parenting up here. I don't have chaotic homes up here. We have biological mechanisms, okay? But I also don't have up here things like sugar consumption or food dyes, because those theories have not been proven. So these are the main pathways by which brain structure and function and chemistry are altered, leading to ADHD. So I wanted to give you a big dose of this because many parents, for the first time learning that their child has ADHD, might have some faulty assumptions about where it came from, or maybe people are telling them faulty assumptions about where it came from. And it's really important to be able to have a better understanding of that.